Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Storytelling in Video Games panel at EGX Digital 2020. My name is Nigel, and I'm the co-founder of the manga brand Mayamada, and organizer of the video game event Gamepad. And today we've got a great discussion all about how video games tell stories, where they've come from in terms of storytelling, what we feel about them right now, how we cover games in terms of storytelling, and what we see in terms of the future of storytelling in video games. So as you can tell, there's going to be a lot of talk about storytelling. Just for people who may be new to us, as I mentioned, I'm the co-founder of Mayamada. And Mayamada is a manga brand where we create manga-style comic books and merchandise and all that stuff set within our own universe of characters and stories. And Gamepad is our social gaming event where we promote inclusion and diversity in gaming by having people come together from different backgrounds, gaming experience to just enjoy video games, and also provide a platform for young people to gain work experience and a leg in, I can't remember what that term is, anyway, something in to the industry. Let's just go straight into it and meet our panelists. So first up, we have a content creator, a streamer, and co-host of our Story X Story podcast and Gamepad online event, Tazzy. Tazzy, welcome.
Hello.
Cool. And next up, we have the host of WTF Weekly on Jinx Esports TV and an Elgato gaming partner, Mr. Midas.
What's going on, people? Thank you so much for having me. Can't wait to talk about games.
Fantastic. All right. And last but not least is a freelance narrative designer with over 5 years in the gaming industry, Brendan Gibbons. Brendan, welcome to the panel.
Hey, nice to meet everyone.
Cool. So that's our esteemed panel for today. Oh, and me, which I've already introduced myself. I will be moderating and just dropping in here and there over the next 45 minutes or so. So without further ado, we're now going to get into our discussion for today. So what I like about this panel is that we've got kind of people with different perspectives, and the reason I wanted to have this discussion kind of came from seeing some of just the general interest in storytelling in video games, and the reaction from some of the things that came out from the release of The Last of Us 2, specifically when it came to people's reaction to certain storytelling elements. So we're not going to spoil The Last of Us 2, just for anyone watching, and for Tazzy, because I know you haven't finished that yet. So, but that just kind of sparked this me thinking about sort of where storytelling has come in video games and how we kind of review and critique the stories that games tell. And one of the things that I think about is how often games are compared to other storytelling mediums. And I feel like video games, to a certain extent, is still in a relative infancy. So you've had cinema that's been around for ages. You've got books that's been around for even longer, theatre, things like that. And cinema is probably the sort of, out of the ones I've mentioned, the most recent. So in terms of like collective memory, we can remember the impact of going from theatre to cinema, and how cinematography kind of changed storytelling, gave it a whole new dimension, expanded the types of stories that could be told. So I wonder for the panel, or maybe we can start with Brendan, is what particular aspects of video games or what particular aspects of storytelling do you think video games have brought to the way we tell stories?
I think it's kind of like three core things that video games have sort of brought, which is number one is choice, and sort of like which relates to second, which is just consequence. And like basically how this ability that we don't necessarily have to just have a linear story, but and even if we have a linear story, that like pieces and details about that story can change drastically. But the final bit is really just like the immersion of the storytelling. I think like there's kind of this difference to when you're watching something and kind of empathizing with what's happening on the screen versus when you're really like feeling that you are that character on the screen and then seeing the things that are happening and really responding emotionally, as if that was yourself, like to the situation, which I think is sort of very, very different to, what we have right now.
So kind of like almost like an agency, an agency to the stories where, like you say, you feel like you are the character.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's just the core thing, like, because you have lots of different games. There's like lots of different things with like the different types of games. But I think the fact that, you get to sort of express yourself, because obviously, like there is still, you have theater, and in some points you do have like interactive theater, and you can express yourself in those. But making it simple and easy and accessible so that everyone can have this moment of like, hey, I want to play as me, or I want to play, as a bad person or as a good person, and kind of explore that part in kind of this safe space in this story, is really, really kind of what games is bringing to the table. It's like, here is the situation. What do you feel about this? And what do you want to try to do? And then, like whether that situation and how that situation unfolds is kind of up to the designer of like what kind of story we want to tell and what kind of emotion we want to make you to feel. But it's that kind of, I think it's that kind of like contract where it's like, okay, I'm going to make you go through something. Do you want to come with me? And, let's go through it together, rather than like where it's just you're kind of sitting down and you're kind of forced to sort of take in anything without, the option of like, oh, I don't necessarily like this part, or I don't want to do this bit because it doesn't feel right, and so on and so
forth. Oh, can't hear you, Nigel.
Yeah, we see you're talking, but we can't hear you.
Yeah, okay, that is because I don't know how mute works. So apologies for that. But what I was saying is, we're definitely going to come back to the idea of what the designers want you to feel. So that's an important part of like where we are today with storytelling and complex narratives. But Midas, I know you're a big fan of sort of story-driven games, and we've talked about the first Last of Us. What do you feel like games are bringing, or how have they changed, like in terms of storytelling as a medium?
Well, I think Brendan kind of said it perfectly, and I think games have for me, the best way of kind of engaging you. Because if we look back at something like a book, like when you're reading a book, it's all about your imagination, you creating that world in your head. But it can almost be limited in terms of like your knowledge, how good you are at reading, if you understand the words, if you get the places they're talking about, like if you can kind of keep that engagement, like that, create that reality. Like, for example, me and Tazzy could read a book and we would see the main character two completely different ways. And then movies is literally you just watching someone else's story and you having an emotional connection, feeling you basically being a third party, where video games for me is the perfect medium because they're telling me the story that exactly how they want me to see it visually, how this place looks, but also allowing me to feel like I am that character. Now, for me, the reason why I play video games is stories. Like the first games I played as a kid, like one of the first games I played was like Wonder Boy and Alex the Kid and stuff like that. And I didn't care about stories then. I didn't care about stories in Sonic. Like, who cared what Eggman was doing? I just wanted to run fast. But like the games that really changed me into being like a hardcore gamer is games like Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past, Ocarina of Time, and Final Fantasy VII. And those games, the reason why I bought so much into them games is because I just got lost in that world, that lore, that story. And I just wanted to know more about them characters and actually felt like those characters were me. Like the reason why I probably connect so much with Link, because I felt like I was Link. I played so much of his adventures. I felt like me and Zelda are brethren. You get me? So yeah, I think games have an incredible way of showing you something, but making you feel like it. And obviously we're not going to go into spoilers, but that's why there's so much controversy around The Last of Us 2, because they're doing something different. They're showing you a narrative, but it's their story, not yours.
Yeah, I'm not going to talk too much about Alex the Kid, but I will say when I played that was like the hardest game for me because you get hit once and you go back to the start of the game, and I just could not handle that at a young age. But we're not here to talk about that and any lasting damage that has done to me. But Tazzy, what do you think has like driven this kind of this change from games as almost like purely mechanics, like Midas was saying, like you didn't care about Eggman, it's just like you're Sonic, you run fast, to actually we need to add this layer of narrative. Like, what do you think is driven? Is like a technology thing, or just a desire from people to see more complex stories?
I mean, it's interesting you say that. So at the moment, I'm reading a book, The History of Video Games. And narrative was like thought of really early on. I can't remember what game was like the first game to have a narrative of some sort. But it went from like just mechanics to the idea of there needing to be a story behind characters. And then like us having like lore, not in the games, but outside of the games. And then now it's like in the games very much. But I think the drive is from people creating their own stories. And I think that's the beauty of video games as a storytelling medium, is that you can either have games that tell the story for you and you are forced, some of them literally force you to go along a journey that might be uncomfortable or not what you would personally choose. And other games will have a bit of a mixture of both, where you're like along for the journey, but your choices affect it. And you can kind of choose either how to navigate that story or how that story goes. And then you have games that don't have a story to it, and you're the one that adds the story. And then I just think it like really opens worlds. Like there's so much possibilities within gaming. And it's less limited than any other form, and it can open up like accessibility. I love reading, but I have dyslexia, and some books I just can't read because the fonts they use, the paper they print on is like makes it really difficult and hard to like really get absorbed in it, because I'm like rereading the same sentence or paragraph. And like games kind of removes that, and like you get to follow on this story. But yeah, and it's just the how much it opens up. You can be anything, can do anything, and you're not limited, and you can do stuff that you wouldn't do in real life. You wouldn't even dream of doing it in real life. I like to be very evil and very violent in video games, but I'm just not those things. And it gives you those options without real life consequence.
Yeah, GTA was a revolution for that because, let's live out a entirely different life with no consequences. You just like get up and walk away from the computer. So before we continue, I just want to get an idea of what people's favorite stories and games are. I know we mentioned Last of Us. We'll talk about that a bit more. I mean, some of mine definitely. Zelda is a big one. Probably more recently, I just loved God of War, the latest one, and even games like Half-Life 2 were just like great in terms of like the narrative that they put forward in the world that they put you in. But anyone feel free to sort of jump in with like what your favorite story-based games are.
I'm going to add one that's not your regular. Titanfall 2, very underrated story in that game. I think people just think shooter, but it is like the best, the best FPS storyline I've ever experienced, and it's a nice little short package as well.
Yeah, Titanfall 2's thing. Do you know as well? A lot of people kind of underrate them, but even some of the Call of Duty campaign stories are really good. Like the World War II campaign storyline.
The original really ones, like when it was on the PC.
Yeah, but even the new World War II, the Call of Duty story, and that is quite gripping. But for me, like my main games I play are JRPGs. Like, I'm a big JRPG guy. And with JRPGs, it's all about the story. And it's about the three types of stories. It's about the character story, it's about the story of the world, and it's about this hero story. And I think, like, with some JRPGs, sometimes the gameplay can be a bit trash, or with JRPGs, sometimes you let things slide just because the story is so good. That one of the games that I played the most in the last couple of years on my Nintendo Switch was Xenoblade Chronicles 2. And I started that game and I was like, oh my God, this game is trash. But I loved it. I got so engrossed in that story that's like one of the games that have just gripped me in the last few years. And I love all the big hitters, like obviously The Witcher, like I said, the Final Fantasies. But yeah, there's like some of these titles that are really obscure, but the stories just grab you. It's like Celeste. Like, people talk so much about Celeste and how that experience makes you feel. And I think for me personally, I will sometimes allow game mechanics not to be the best if the story's great. Like, if the story really captures me, where I'm not really the person like, oh my God, all the mechanics have to be sick and the story is a secondary. I can kind of let certain things slide if that story can really take me on a journey it needs to.
I want to play more JRPGs, but basically game developers just in general don't have time to spend like 300 hours, because we're busy spending 300 hours on our own game or whatever that we're doing. So unfortunately, we don't get the time to play a lot of stuff really deeply. But I think we do have a really good crop of narrative games lately. Like, I think there's we're getting to the point where we're really exploring what it means to tell a story through through gameplay, or just like, how do we tell these kind of really sort of unique stories that you don't get the chance, or you just straight up wouldn't be able to in any kind of medium. And I think like the two most recent ones that really stood out to me is like the Outer Wilds, the sort of like the indie game where you're sort of exploring space, and just that feeling of like going. Because I think often like exploration is just like a thing that you do, but here is the focus, and like, you really get to sort of study the world and study the lore and get through all of that. And I think the other game I would definitely recommend is like Disco Elysium, because as a game, it's it's sort of the more traditional sort of classic computer RPG, but the way that it's so deft with its writing. And it's able to really kind of like, and it has this heart. Like, I think it kind of can be a little bit abrasive, but it kind of wants to tell you a story about people and like who they are and like these little nuggets. And I think that's always absolutely wonderful. I think funny enough, I think probably the most important game to me, or like the one that like kind of taught me about game stories and kind of how to make those, or like how to think about these, is probably Jet Set Radio, because even though it doesn't have a lot of story,
did not expect to hear
right?
that.
Like the way that it conveys to you this moment, this place, through its art, through its music, through its feeling. I think that to me, like, like it's because as a like narrative design is about like telling the story with every single tool you have about video game development, and telling the story like as holistically as possible. And I think like, the example that I always kind of want to go back to, just because, even though like the controls are a bit janky now, but definitely just like this moment of like hearing the music, feeling this absolutely like different world, and getting to like know this place, it just like blew my mind when I was a kid. And it's like, yes, this is it kind of been like, this is what it showed me what the potential of the medium was, I think.
That's I feel like that with the Breath of the Wild as well, because I feel like the Breath of the Wild is probably the worst like main story in a Zelda game, but the world tells you the most incredible story, and like the little adventures that you just go on to and you interact in, and just the world is telling you a whole story on its own. The world's telling you a whole story on its own without having a very strong narrative thread. And I think that's why games are so incredible, because we can all have different experiences with a game just because of the story that the world's telling us, because we're all going to play it differently, even if it's a completely linear story. Like, I might walk in a room and look at every poster, where Tazzy might walk in and walk straight out, or Brendan might go and try and see if there's treasure chests. So even on a super linear story, we're all going to have a different experience.
Yeah, I get that. I think that is like kind of what Tazzy was saying about creating your own experience within the game.
And I think as well, to add what Mr. Myler said about the Breath of the Wild, and there's all these like little treasures, and you can follow like one random character's story, or like there's all the like secret armor and the stories behind them. You find a clue, and then someone talks about it, and there's like this legend. And I think it was really well done, because, you know, Legend of Zelda stories kind of follow the same path. And it was like, you kind of know how the story goes. We're going to add smaller stories into this world that you're familiar with, but you don't fully know. And you can kind of take yourself on that path. And then there's another game I wanted to mention. Actually, I'm going to mention two more. Hellblade's Sona's Sacrifice, which incredible. And the reason why it was such a good, I didn't even finish it because I got stuck in this one point. And I was like, I'm too stressed. There's so much emotion in this game. And because it kind of forces you on this path, and it really immerses you in this story, and it uses visuals and sounds so well that like you're just like transformed into someone else. Basically, you feel things you might not have felt before, or felt in like not quite strongly. And the way they use elements like fire is terrifying in that game, and you're forced to like walk through flames, and you like, I have a very vivid imagination, so like I can like almost feel the heat from the flames as I'm walking through, and it's terrifying. And you're going through this like whole emotional journey, and as well as like your actual struggle for being able to play the game. And it just adds that level, and I think a lot of games do that by adding struggle. It really helps change the storytelling. And then another one is Prince of Persia: Sands of Time. Absolutely loved that game when I was younger. And how it uses like time, like the time warping. It's not really time travel, you're only going back a few minutes, but to like add a different way to tell that story. And it's just like the magic of how video games can tell a story.
That's cool. I think, yeah, it's interesting to hear some of the games you've picked up and some of the reasons why you like those game stories. And it's not always the story that's told, which is interesting to hear. So I think that kind of like goes towards like the mechanics of a game, which is something that I did want to touch on. And like, as I was putting these notes together, something that sort of came out of the research that I was doing is that like video games in terms of like genre. So if we're talking like a genre of story, video games have tended to lend themselves towards certain types of genres. So you've got your fantasy, your sci-fi, your horror, your war story. We talked about Call of Duty, but then there's been like almost like an absence, not necessarily a complete absence, but less of other genres. So I was thinking like comedy or romance or things like that. So like, Brendan, you're someone who's in the process of like on that side in terms of like development and making video game stories. I wonder if you have an idea of like why that might be, like why video games tend to lend themselves to certain types of genres, why we see more of a certain type of genres than others.
Sure. I think there's kind of like two different reasons, which is one is about marketing and like the audience that we choose to select. Because I mean, definitely, I think a big part of like why games, say in like the 80s and 90s, is kind of the way they are, is because of, you know, like the history of the video game with like the video game crash, and then like we chose as an industry to target only cishet white boys, and you know, to specifically sell to them, and then from that kind of thing, like it kind of go forwards. But the second thing is also like, when you're making a game, what you're usually thinking about is the verbs. Like, what can you do within the game, and and that kind of really brings it forward. And like, if you're thinking about verbs for like, okay, if you're in a war game, what do? You shoot. Like, that's really simple, and that's how you interact with the world. But in a romance game, or in a comedy game or in a crime game, what do you do? Like talking is often, it can sort of just be there, but that's not like really a system. That's like a thing full of content. It's not like you can make we're going to make a comedy game and all you can do is like trip. Like, it's sort of, I guess that's where like looking at like Fall Guys, there's like physics and those sort of things, right? But like, it's been really this moment where like we've been, because, from the beginning, like looking at like arcade stuff, and as we grow and really trying to rethink about like what verbs can we offer the player, and in what kind of like how much abstraction or like fidelity like we want that verb to have. Like, if you're shooting, obviously, is it just like, are we mimicking the physics, or are we just like, doing like hit scan or like these kind of things that you're kind of thinking about? But I mean, there is also just one sort of like side thing where I don't necessarily think it's true that that some of these genres are absent, because it really depends where you're looking at. Like, mobile games have a ton of romantic comedy stuff, right? And I've actually written for some of those where one of the work I did was I took an existing book that was a supernatural kind of romance thing, with like literally like, with werewolves and vampires, and that's the classic. And like I wrote that and turned that into a video game, so then you could play this this version of the book and kind of like actually choose who your love interest is. Or there's also just like interactive fiction or visual novels that are like more related to like the crime or trying to do comedy. It's just like this, because it's just like they focus on usually like the more traditional like word storytelling aspect of things rather than kind of the gameplay of things, because like, it's that verb problem where like we don't know what, like when you click, what actually happens, and then it's like, you hug? No, that's not going to be good for everyone. Like, what do you do? Like, that's kind of where the issue comes from, and then what we need to unpack and unfold.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. Like you say, the verb, I hadn't thought of that, because obviously like shooting is like almost like the default. And I was just thinking about games where, like you come to a door and where you're not allowed to go through the door, and you just think, I must shoot the door. Like, I've had those kind of thoughts, because we're so trained to just like shoot things, and that's how you interact with the world. And I guess when you're kind of thinking from that perspective, and to continue with like the shoot analogy, when that's the way you interact with the world, that does kind of limit the interaction you have with the world, but also the kind of stories that you can tell in that world, if that's the main verb. So that's an interesting point.
I mean, I'd love a game where you go out to people and hug them. Why is that not a mechanic?
There is a few small indie games. I think there's one called Hug Punks where you literally it's just like a side, like a little one screen thing where you just go around and you're a pixel person and you just hugging people, and it's very small and it's nice. But obviously, like, how do you bring that forward, and how do you tell stories, and that kind of thing is the problem that we kind of always have, and how do you market that as well, and all those issues. That's kind of where we come from, basically.
Yeah, and you make a good point about because like I say, like you say, it's not completely, some genres aren't completely absent. It's just where you're looking for them, and like indie games are good ground for that. Mobile games, like you say. So I guess it's that kind of at the top end of your AAA games, so to speak, where you've maybe got that limited selection. So Midas, were you going to add something?
Yeah, I think what's really cool as well with stories nowadays, I think that stories are becoming more human. So we're getting more funny, more romantic, more family elements in our stories. So if you think of something like Uncharted, like I love the Uncharted series. The first couple Uncharted was, I'm cool, I'm strong, I steal treasure, I shoot guys. Where in Uncharted 4, it's about like the best scene is when Nathan Drake's with his partner and they're sitting down and they're playing Crash Bandicoot and they're talking about their day and they're drinking and like that was better than the scenes of him jumping around and shooting. And there's so much family element and loss and stuff like that. So even in those I'm cool games now, they're bringing like those comical, those family moments, those realistic, because as humans, we're not one thing. And like Brendan was talking about, marketing teams always break things down. They're like, all right, who's this for? Who are we packaging it for? It's just for this person. The only person who can play this game is a straight white male. And the only person who can play this game is a black guy from the hood. Where no, we're humans. Like we all do everything. We don't do one thing. We all laugh. We all like to cry. We all like, well, not all, but some of us like gangster movies. We like different things. And I think game stories now are introducing all of these different things. Like I just platinum Ghost of Tsushima, and there's so many like typical like of those Japanese movie comical moments where you get the like a stereotypical kind of character, and just them really trying to push those kind of comical moments in a game that's a bit about being a samurai and slicing up as many people as you want to.
Yeah, I still need to get that game. That's on my long list of games I still need to play. But I wanted to touch on like the character element of what you're saying, Midas, where in the same way that you can have sort of the way you interact with the world determines the kind of genre and the kind of stories you tell. The characters that you have in the game also kind of determine that. And you have situations like you mentioned in Uncharted where you have those like sort of down moments, those sort of more character relationship focused moments. And I know that's another thing in terms of video games that has developed and we've seen, and we're going to sort of come on to The Last of Us as I've teased throughout this, where, you know, originally like games that used a lot of the kind of stereotypes, where like your classic damsel in distress story, and that was the basis for the rest of the game, and it's an easy thing to go to. Whereas now we're seeing that more complex, sort of character focused storytelling and narratives. But I did actually just wanted to ask Brendan, in terms of, I don't know if you know, I don't know the exact date, but just at what point you feel that because your role is like narrative designer, and at what point you felt that became like a integral part of the video game development process?
I think I think the having someone who acts as a narrative designer was that probably came relatively early on, but like the title itself is still something that's actually very new, and something like as an industry we're really figuring out, like whether it's something that is, for example, doing high level work, like as in like concepting, thinking about the story, and you know, like if you imagine like a film director, like that kind of work, or like a narrative designer is actually more about kind of the smaller pieces of like, okay, you know, like doing the writing and taking care of things in engine and that kind of stuff. Like we're still really like figuring out what that space is and what that means to be a narrative designer. Because I think it's just the point is like the focus is like it's in this intersection between like game designer and writer, and like this kind of the how do we tell stories but using the both tools. But I think that's something that like a lot of game designers have thought about for a while. Like it's just, and you know, like if you think about, I don't know, like old, Tezzy was like talking about like the very old, like text-based games, maybe like Zork or like those kind of things, or like text adventures, or like even like multi-user dungeons and that kind of stuff. And you know, like they still probably had a lot of game designers who was thinking about the story and putting themselves in a position that what we call now a narrative designer. But I think it's still something that's new and something that we're really trying to figure out like exactly what to do.
Okay. Yeah, no, it's interesting to see how that's kind of shaped and how it continues to develop. So I want to also touch on like how we review, analyze, maybe critique some of these games. So I think we touched on like the sort of the expanded types of stories, types of characters that we might see in video games. I wonder, like Tazzy, like, because obviously like we work on Gamepad and the idea is to sort of increase that inclusion. And from a storytelling perspective, how do you feel like the expanded, or what do you feel like expanded storytelling mechanisms has done for like inclusion in video games?
I'm going to start with, I feel like there's still so far to go. I feel like game development tiptoes around exploring diverse storytelling, diverse mechanics, and like how inclusive games can be. And I feel like, I mean, indie development is always a great place to look, because indie development tends to take bigger risks, bigger leaps, bigger sort of like push those boundaries a lot more. But kind of need to see that from bigger studios, and not just bigger studios, but there's still like big indie studios, right? They're like still known to us all. Just like the studios that are in the forefront and game development that is like on the front cover needs to take more risks. Come on, like we've got the shoot 'em up big strong guy down, and then sometimes they'll change it to a strong woman, and like that's about as far as it goes. But yeah, I definitely think there's more, and there's just different. I don't know. I feel like we come across like quite a few games that explore different ways to have a narrative, different audiences in mind, and yeah, what was the question again?
No, I was just thinking about like how the more complex storytelling, like what that's done for inclusion, and you kind of touched on that in terms of sort of where it needs to improve. And I guess maybe the idea is like, if by having more stories, do you then can bring more people in? But you're saying like that there's still a way to go for that.
Yeah, and yeah, so yeah, I feel like it's there. It's on people's minds, and people are just a bit scared. But there's definitely been more characters and more things. I think the biggest thing is like character design. I think it's really important to either, if you're having a game where the character is chosen for you, like you are playing a set character, that we have a more variety of characters that those are. And I think we're starting to see more of that. The Avengers obviously is coming out in a couple of days. Oh, wait. This is going out. The Avengers will be out when this goes. So yeah, and that, you know, with Ms. Marvel, we've got a very new type of character we don't really see represented. And then games where you design your own character, like we're starting to see more. It's still not enough. Like I feel like needs to be more, but I have a thing where for a long time I never would try and create me in a video game, because I knew it's just completely impossible. Like I would never get me right in a video game. I wouldn't have the right facial features, I wouldn't have the right skin tone, I wouldn't have the right hairstyle or anything even similar. And slowly, like very slowly, we're starting to see more of those. And yeah, like that can really add, like something as simple as that can really add. And then just like considering everyone, I feel like even when they tend to design it, like I'm only going to be able to speak from like myself, because I am only myself, right? But like when they tend to design like women in video games, they tend to miss a whole load of stuff that like we constantly have to worry about and are concerned with, and are just things that not necessarily like are important, but they're things that in everyday life we'd be conscious of. There's stuff like of obviously not exclusive to females, but if you're female, you're more likely to have long hair, and that gets in the way. I have long curly hair; it gets in the way. I have to consider what hairstyle I have, down to like bodily functions. There's, you know, we have a time of the month, and we have to think about that. But that is not mentioned in any video games. There's women running around, and we're playing as them for like like over a long period, and there's not like any point where they've like had to use the bathroom or like like that's a real thing, and it'd be cool to just see that represented in video games, like things we have to worry about. Video games love to make women have big boobs. I'm a small-chested woman, so I don't have this problem, but a lot of my friends complain about moving around with big boobs and having the right support. And that is not in video games. But yeah, I went off on a big rant.
Yeah, no, but I mean,
rein it back a bit.
Yeah, no, it's cool. It goes to the point of like continuing to expand like the kind of stories and characters that are shown. And I think just going from that to speaking about the sort of like more female characters to transition to The Last of Us. So I just wanted to sort of, as we bring this panel to an end, just talk about how games are covered and how they're reviewed. Because in The Last of Us, you had so first of all, you've got a female protagonist and other sort of prominent female characters. You have a sort of a female who is also a gay character, and you've got that kind of representation. And I want to take aside just a negative reaction to anything that isn't sort of straight white male experience and people sort of going mad over that. Just take that aside. But the argument of how games make you feel, and then how we then cover that. So Midas, I know you have finished The Last of Us Part 2. I have also finished it. So like we know what happens and we know like how we feel. But what do you think about this idea of a game? Because what I got from a lot of the reaction is that Naughty Dog made you feel a certain way that was not always positive. In fact, a lot of it was quite negative. And I feel people took that to mean it's a bad game, where if you're not feeling great or if you don't agree with what the character's doing, because a lot of times in that game I do not agree with what characters are doing, but it doesn't make it a bad game from my perspective. Like, how do you feel about that, and how do you feel how that changes how games are covered?
So before I said, I just want to take off one thing of what Tazzie's point, what she said. Tazzie's so right. It's trash when it comes to like representation right now. And I think it's getting much better as we've seen. One thing that really kind of irks me is when we have games like, I love Horizon Zero Dawn. Amazing. But for me, Aloy should have been Native American. Because everything she's doing, that whole story is a story of someone that's Native American. But the marketing team was like, no, need to have a straight white woman because it's easier to market. So yeah, I just wanted to say that, Tazzy. Thumbs up, what you said was definitely right. Now, in terms of reviewing the game, Nigel, what you said is so true. Like, so many people are angry at The Last of Us. And I think the reason why people are angry at The Last of Us Part 2, which is an incredible piece of art, like it's incredible, is because video games, we always feel like we're playing our story. We're connected to a character. We go on a journey with them. We paint a picture of who that person is. My Link is different from your Link. Your Aloy is different from my Aloy. We can look different, all of those kind of stuff to kind of make that character yours. And that's what the experience that we've always been used to. And we kind of felt that with The Last of Us Part 1. We went on a journey with these characters who we felt that were ours. And The Last of Us Part 2, Naughty Dog said, nope, this is not your story. This is ours. You're just watching what happens. And they take you on this journey that just feels uncomfortable. And at points you feel violated. And you're just like, why have you told me this story? And you telling me this story that makes me uncomfortable doesn't make it a bad game. Let me give a different example. I don't know if any of you lot have watched that film, Us. And at the end of Us, they kind of reveal this big horror thing. And spoiler for Us, if you haven't watched, basically the person who you think is like the evil person isn't, and it's the opposite person. And that left me feeling uncomfortable for about 4 days. I couldn't stop thinking about like, why did they do the little girl like that? Like, uncomfortable for days, but not at one point did I think, oh, that film's rubbish, man. That film's rubbish. It just made me feel uncomfortable. And I think people got so connected to Joel and Ellie, they was like, you're going against our Joe and our Ellie. And it's not ours. It's Naughty Dog's story. And they told you a story, and they did two things. They told you a story that made you uncomfortable, but also they're so smart. They visually made you see someone from the start and made them powerful, and then showed you how powerful they were to make you say, I dislike this person from the jump. And then they're going to be like, all right, let's see how you feel about that by the end of the game. Amazing.
Yeah.
Probably one of the best narratives I've ever played in a game. Not saying that I like the story. Story got me mad. I felt uncomfortable. I had to have a shower.
Absolutely.
Go and have a shower. When I finished that story, felt disgusted, but incredible. Yeah. And I think great journalists will understand that. I think certain people who just want it their way are not going to understand it. And I kind of think that's going to happen with all mediums. I just think it's harder in ours.
No,
that's not right.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. I was just going to say,
everyone's there.
Yeah, I know. We could have a whole panel on this. Go on, Brendan.
I think just like very quickly, I think maybe like the issue there then is like, it's just, it's about expectation and communication. I think that's kind of the thing that video games kind of, and the marketing of it need to be just like do a little bit better of. I think if it was, if maybe it wasn't The Last of Us Part 2, but it was a completely new game, and it did that, and it kind of told you like, we want to tell this story of this, like very early on. Because I think with films, you have that kind of expectation of like, oh, if you're going to watch a horror movie, of course you're going to feel uncomfortable. Like, we're here to make you feel uncomfortable. But we don't quite have that bit of communication in video games, like where it's like, I mean, yeah, of course we do have horror games, but like in normal kind of things where it's like, oh, we do want to touch on some, tougher topics. There's not quite room to explain that maybe, or like, it's just not quite normal yet. But I think, I totally agree. It's just about like, like that is, the fact that something can make you feel is the sign of a good story. It's the sign of a good story, right? It can make you feel a thing. And it's just, unfortunately, maybe we're not quite in the stage where we can communicate, or like we have as an industry, the vocabulary to communicate like, oh, this game, we're trying to make you feel bad. Sorry, like that's what it is. Like that's it.
Yeah, no, it was weird for me to see people say, oh, Naughty Dog are trying to manipulate your emotions and stuff. And that's literally what stories are there for.
That's what every game does.
Yeah, exactly. So, but we're almost at the end of the panel. But I want to give Tazzy, even though you haven't played Last of Us 2, which you totally should do, then we'll talk more about it on our podcast. But go on, you have the last word, and then we'll close out the panel.
I'm totally going to play it. Just a quick comment on the fact that I feel like it's important that they didn't premise that it was going to make people feel uncomfortable, because maybe they wouldn't play it. And I feel like the consumers of the video games industry are spoiled. They want everything their way in their story, and it's about time that people opened up their minds and tried experiencing other people's shoes. And like that, it sounds like that's what Last of Us 2 done, and I think that's so important. I think it's so important that players are kind of forced to experience someone else's perspective, because I think as an industry, that's not really shown much, and the people consuming it literally go out their way to not experience things. Not everyone, but there's definitely a big portion of like the loudest people that go out of their way to not experience other people's shoes. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's a brilliant way to sort of end that. Is stories are about experiencing other people's experience, and we should sort of embrace that and use the video game medium to tell more of these stories. So I feel like we could have gone on like for more on that, but thank you all for joining me. It's been great to get like your perspectives from playing games, from covering games, from making games, on how storytelling in video games has changed and maybe can continue to change. So thanks again for joining us, and thank you for watching, and thank you to EGX for giving us this platform to talk about storytelling in video games. So as always, you can sort of follow MyMatter and see the stories that we make. We are on social media at MyMatter on Twitter and at MyMadTees on Instagram. We also make our own stories. We also run our own video game event, as I mentioned at the top. And if you like the sound of my voice and Tazzy's voice, we also have a podcast, Story X Story, where we talk about stories across pop culture, including like manga, films, comics, anime, and video games, obviously. So yeah, you can check that out online. So this has been our panel. Thank you all for watching again. If you have any questions or feedback, feel free to send us your questions or feedback to feedback@mymatter.com, and we'll be happy to discuss stories with you. Until next time, we will see you all later. Goodbye.